Welcome to the Rise to Thrive podcast with your hosts, Linda Tate and Amelia Travis, your life resource for manifestation, wellness, and abundance. Tune in weekly to thrive daily. This week's episode coming at you. Hi, Rise to Thrivers. Welcome to episode 7, starring your co-hosts, Linda Tate, myself, and Amelia Travis. And for a very exciting episode today, hi Amelia, where we get to ask her a number of amazing questions, get to know her better, and what brought her to come together to bring this amazing podcast to life. So good day, Amelia. Welcome.
Hi guys. You can't see me, but I'm standing like a real nerd right now with my hands in front of my chest because I'm a little bit nervous about being interviewed. A little bit.
No need for the nerves. We're all friends here.
I'm also truly really excited because I'm actually a total ham, and like being in the spotlight is like one of my favorites. So today is like, it's all about me.
Ask me you, baby.
Yeah. But hopefully it's not actually all about me and it's relevant to other people. Otherwise, you just click up right on out of here and go do something that benefits you, okay? We start trailing on about when I was a young girl.
It happens.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Linda.
Thanks for being here, Amelia. And today I want to start with, who are you today? How did you get here? And how is Rise to Thrive a part of your life?
What a great question. Well, who are you in our culture often equates to what do you do?
But that's what I really meant.
Yeah, I'm going to table that for just a second, tell you who I am. I'm a woman. My name's Amelia. You guys already know that. I'm a wife, mother, and conscious human being who is doing her best every single day to live a life that feels good and that aligns with my passions. So I'm basically just a human, broken, flawed, all that stuff like everybody else. And what I do with my life is education and empowerment for women. So that umbrella manifests itself in a couple different ways. I'm the owner and founder of Stoked Yogi, where I provide education retreats and teacher trainings, primarily to yoga teachers, but also to wellness entrepreneurs. And the founder of Stoked Collective, where I share knowledge commerce. So basically teaching people how to run a successful conscious business. And I do coaching. So I'm a self-love and business strategy coach for conscious female entrepreneurs. So basically everything I do is education and empowerment. My life purpose is to love people and to help them love themselves and to help them live the life that they imagine and desire.
Did you wake up, when you were like 5 and you're like, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up?
No. And yes, I've always wanted to live 1,000 lifetimes within my life. So I've had many different aspirations. When I was a child, I think the first job, I wanted to be like a singer, like a celebrity. And when it quickly became apparent that that was not my dharma, because I have a very sweet voice, but it breaks like here and there. It's not always sweet. Sometimes it's a little sour. I think my next goal was to be an oncologist. I remember like reading a book about some girl with cancer and it was really sad. And I was like, I want to be an oncologist because I want to help people with cancer. And then that evolved into, I wanted to be an epidemiologist which is like the study of infectious diseases. I think I read a Michael Crichton book and I decided that that's what I wanted to be. Basically, I was a total bookworm and nerd, and I read a lot of books. And with every book I read, I had a new thing that I wanted to do. So I worked through like wanting to be a body language expert and working in criminal justice. Like I wanted to be a federal investigator, like with an expertise in body language. I wanted to, at one point, be a journalist, which, I am a writer. So some of what I do is in that desire. And then there was a period of my adolescence where I just wanted to be rich as fuck. And however I was going to do that. And so that, would later translate to me selling real estate and insurance and working in the mortgage industry right before that went kaput in 2006. So I've had a lot of different dreams, and I don't think it was until around age 30 that I was able to see the common thread of just wanting to educate and empower women and people really, but specifically women, because I do have a heart for my sisters. And so, yeah, it's only been in the past 3 years that I think I've been able to truly distill the fact that everything I do does come down to those two pillars of education and empowerment of other women.
Going from where you were to having that kind of clarity, what do you think the biggest blessing in that has been for you?
Oh man, the freedom from feeling like I'm going to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up, right? Because that's the thing, is it's like there's so much pressure in our society and our culture to define yourself by what you do, and having the status or the dominance that comes along with that particular title. And I think, like we share about so much on this show, when we approach things from a place of feminine intelligence, and I mean like the archetypal feminine intelligence that's more process driven than productivity driven, the question is like, how do we want to feel while we live our lives? Like not necessarily what label do we want to have slapped on us, but like, what do we want to be experiencing along the way? So I think just the freedom to know that by trusting that my mission is education and empowerment of women, I have permission to wear all the hats that I currently wear, and also to be totally open to putting on new hats in the future.
Like however you get there is cool, but you know where you're going.
Yeah, I get to be a wife and a mother, and those, are related to men. I mean, I have men in my home. I don't have any girls, even Barney's a boy. But I still get to do education and empowerment in my home space, as a coach, as a teacher, as a writer, as a speaker. All of these things bring in those elements of education and empowerment. And I have permission. Like, it's like, I don't have to be attached to feeling like I'm forever only a yoga teacher. And I'm putting that in quotes because I know that's the way some people think. It's like, oh, I don't want to pigeonhole myself into this one thing. We talked about that last week on your episode. Hi, Linda, is like, you've got all these different certifications and skills and like experiences and things that you want to offer in your life. You are a chef, you are a personal trainer, you are a yoga teacher, you are a financial advisor. And some people might think, well, always that confusing to be all of these different things. And it's like, no, it's actually freedom to recognize that you can be and do so many different things in your life. And those can grow and change and evolve, and they're always going to inform who you are, but not define who you are.
Yeah, and the desire to slap the label on that is going to be the forever stamp. It's like the freedom. When you say freedom, that's what I think of, is freedom from that need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I think about my future, some of the things that I desire to do, like I desire to do speaking on a large scale. Like I want to be up there, doing a TED Talk. I want to be hosting a women's leadership summit. I have a desire to host women's events that are really spiritual. And so I've had people ask me, well, have you ever thought about becoming a pastor? And I'm like, yeah, actually I have, because not because I want to even align with or prescribe any particular religious doctrine, but because I want to empower people in recognizing the agency of their spirit, that we each have access to a hotline to the thing that's bigger than ourselves. And we get to decide what that experience looks like. So it's
Amen.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Can I get a witness? Yeah. Right here.
So yeah. You mentioned reading a ton, and I know you from the first time I met you having so much knowledge, and I was so impressed from the very beginning. I'm like, oh my gosh, she knows so much, and the language that you use, and just very, very intelligent. But I'd love to hear, and our listeners to hear a little bit more about your origin and your upbringing and your life story from your earlier days.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'll let you guys know first that I don't remember a lot of it. And I think that's because I smoked a lot of weed from like 13, 14 on. So I'm not sure if that's why, or if for most people that their childhood is a bit foggy, but my early childhood, I don't really remember that well. Like I don't remember specific episodes outside of what was recorded in our family videos or what I have photo evidence of in photo albums and those kind of like trigger memories. But on the whole, you know, I grew up in like a pretty standard American family, one sister, a mom and a dad and a dog and 2 cats in a house. I would say it was a privileged white upper middle class upbringing. My dad was an attorney. My mom's a psychology professor, and I was born in Fresno, lived there until I was 9, and then moved up to Davis, California, which is right near Sacramento, which is the capital. So everything was pretty like mellow and chill and just kind of good and normal until I was 13, almost 14. That summer, my dad went to his 35th high school reunion, came home and said, I've fallen in love with somebody else and I'm leaving. And this was after 23 years of marriage. And, you know, my parents never having fought really or argued. Our home was very much conflict free. So that was a huge upending. And I feel like that was a big pivotal point in my life that completely shifted the trajectory of who I viewed myself to be through the lens of my family and would change where I was going. Because what I will say is as a child, I was pretty chubby and nerdy. I had glasses and I was always like a straight A student. I was the smartest kid in the class. You know, in 2nd grade, we had to like do a reading list. Like we would read books and they would put up like a running banner around the top of the room that was made of these pieces of paper. And, you know, most people, I think the expectation was they might have like 5 or 6 pieces of paper by the end of the year. And my list wrapped around the room 3 times. And it was like, you know, there was insecurity in that developed because kids would always copy off my paper, and it would make me really mad. And they would, you know, tease me for being really smart, but at the same time want my intelligence, want my help. And that created, I don't know, some weird stuff in me where I felt like, especially as I headed towards my teenage years, that I needed to really shed the nerdiness or the smart girl label. And so I did that very intentionally by moving into the rebellious girl label or the bad girl label. And that's interesting now to be able to experience integration of those 2 aspects of self and be like, oh no, I can be a wild child and I can be really smart. Like,
yeah.
that's great. Those are the women that I love to surround myself with, are the ones who are really smart, really passionate, and also like to get a little crazy, you know what I mean? Like, and also own their little bit of crazy. So yeah, so my childhood was good. Adolescence was rough. After that split, you know, my mom has always suffered with depression. And so she went into a pretty dark place during that time. But as a psychologist, knew how to handle her biz. So she checked herself, you know, into a mental hospital, and she she did what she needed to do to heal in that time. But it was a lot of inner work, which meant that, and my dad was clearly focused on this new love relationship. So parents became a little bit less, I think, present and involved. And my sister and I kind of had to figure out how to fend for ourselves through that period. And my sister is also a genius. She's incredible. Hi, Amanda. She works for NASA. She's an administrator now, but is really a rocket scientist at heart. That's what she does. And she dove even further into education and into books. That was her coping mechanism. And mine was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like, let me channel this pain into sleeping with as many people as possible, you know, getting as much love or affection as I can that way, numbing out with alcohol and drugs as much as possible, and then just being really angry. I was very angry to everyone, really. And that was my defense mechanism, you know, was just be a bitch. And then if people don't like you or they leave you, then you know why. Yeah, it's because you made them leave, right? Instead of you're being abandoned, I'm being abandoned. So that was my youth. And I think, yeah, is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah, that's perfect. And then when you transition from that into your 20s, what changed for you?
Well,
or what didn't change?
Yeah, I think that might be a more pertinent question. So I through those rebellious teen years, I was truant from high school. I didn't go. I just would get dropped off at school, and then I'd bounce out and go smoke some weed around the corner, and then meander around downtown Davis and, like, I don't know, just get into trouble. And so I was truant. In middle of my sophomore year, I was a cheerleader, but I wasn't going to school very often. And I came to a basketball game, and I went and smoked a blunt in the field house at halftime, and came back to the basketball game really high. And my coach noticed, surprise, and was like, "You're high right now." And I was like, "No, I'm not." And then just started laughing, you know, and she's like, you're off the squad. Like, and she kicked me off the cheerleading squad. And then, you know, that was like too bad. But then about a week later, I got called into the principal's office, and they said, and my parents were there, which I was an unexpected meeting. And they said, "You missed 31 days of school last semester." Which, you know, you guys do the math. I don't know. I guess that's a lot. Like, it was a problem that I had missed 31 days of school. And they said, "This is truancy. So, you know, your parents can, like, go to jail for this," which I was just like, "This is ridiculous," but okay. And they said, "You can do independent study, or you can be kicked out." And I was like, "So you're telling me there's an option where I can go to school for an hour a week and still graduate just like everybody else?" And it wasn't, you know, a continuation school, it was just a normal school. And they were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to take that option." That sounds like a great option. So I did independent study, and then completed, you know, the time that I'd missed, and the remaining years very quickly. So I was ready to graduate when I was, before I was even 17. And then I did end up going back to high school for my senior year. But during that time that I was doing independent study, I met a guy who was 6 years older. I had a job working at a public records research firm, and I met a guy, and you know, we started dating and quickly got into a pretty serious relationship. I was 16 and he was 21 or 22. And so when I graduated from high school, we moved in together right away. And I always wanted to be a grown-up. You know what I mean? I always felt like I wanted to be an adult. And so I did things really, like, out of order. Like, I went from being a child to trying to be a grown-up, and, like, working full-time and doing school independent study and having an older boyfriend and raising his daughter. She was 5 when we met. So I was 15, just turned 16, and dating someone who had a 5-year-old daughter. And then when we moved in together, when I was 17, part of my life was taking her to school and picking her up and helping her with her homework. And, you know, not full time, but half the week. Half the week I had a child who was 11 years younger than I was. And that went on for 6 years. So that was really interesting period where I actually was not deep into the drugs or alcohol. I kind of got back on the straight and narrow, and, you know, sold insurance and mortgages, and worked for a blood bank, and did a bunch of good job stuff, you know, in and out of community college during that time. And, but what happened was, it was a very toxic and volatile relationship. Everybody has baggage, and his baggage was around abandonment, and specifically like a mother wound and a distrust of women. Mm-hmm. And so that manifested itself into controlling, emotionally and mentally abusive behavior. You know, I couldn't go to the bookstore. Like, if I was at Borders bookstore, he would text me and be like, you know, "Where the F are you?" Like, and then I'd come home and he'd accuse me of being with somebody else or cheating or whatever. And it was just it was very unhealthy. And I think many of our listeners can probably relate. Adolescent females, you know, we don't always have you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I think a lot of times our first relationships, they're opportunities for learning and for growth. But one of the first lessons that many women learn is what we're willing to tolerate and what we're not willing to tolerate in terms of control and, like, our own autonomy. Mm-hmm. And it took me 6 years. It took me 6 years to realize, like, oh, you know, being, you know, told that I'm, like, a slut, or I'm cheating, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that, being gaslighted, being told that my behavior or my actions were doing one thing when that was never my intention. You know, it was really unhealthy. And there were so many examples of it, but if you recognize it, then you recognize it. And I think many people do.
Was it an aha moment, or was it like the compilation?
What happened was, I was in pretty good shape for about 4 years of that relationship. And then, you know, can't lay this blame on him, but my disordered eating started to really shine through. And I see the connection there, that I felt like many aspects of my life were being controlled by somebody else, and therefore they were out of my control. And also my dad was very sick. He was sick most of my life, but he was really sick again from 19 to 24. He died when I was 24. And so my way of responding to life being out of control was to control what I could, which was my diet. And so by 20, I was 5'7" and 107 pounds. I was pretty severely anorexic. Even though at the time I wouldn't have prescribed to that label, I felt like I was just a really controlled eater. But what that meant for me is I knew the calories of anything, any food item. I could tell you exactly how many calories were in it. And my personal consumption of calories ranged from 300 to 800 a day, depending on the day. And I have journals full of self-loathing, you know, entries about how many calories, and like, oh, you know, you're a cow and we need to slaughter the cow, and like just really horrible, violent. I can laugh about it now, but it's like very sad and not funny. So I started to implode in a sense. Like I was starving myself, and then other just challenging, like the circumstances with that relationship and with my dad, I had generalized anxiety. And so I started to see a psychiatrist about, I was having some panic attacks and then like just generalized anxiety, and was given options in terms of antidepressants and whatever. But then one psychiatrist gave me Klonopin, lorazepam, and like Xanax. So barbiturates were instant addiction for me. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I can take this, and then a blanket of numbness comes over me, and I don't, like, there's no more problems. And it wasn't even there's no more problems, it's there's no more emotion, right? Because I didn't have the self-awareness that we talk about so much on this show around emotions and around emotional integration, and around embodiment. Like I was completely disconnected from my body, and my emotions were just like a violent, raging whirlwind that I didn't know how to work with them. So I felt like they were my enemy. So I was my own enemy, right? So
all of a sudden, oh, here, light switch off, emotions off.
So where I wasn't necessarily like drinking or like doing drugs, I was starving myself and I was abusing prescription pills. And then my mom broke her leg in a bicycle accident, and she was prescribed oxycodone, Percocet. And so then I started to steal her Percocet. And it was like the prescription pill thing was really interesting because I felt like it wasn't really drugs. And so, but I would steal people's pills, or I would order them. This is when you could still order them online from like international pharmacies. And what I started doing was just creating really lethal cocktails every day, depending on my mood, of combinations of painkillers, barbiturates, and then stimulants. Like I would steal Adderall from, you know, friends who had Adderall. I could never really buy that one, but I developed a bad prescription pill habit. And so that created a cycle in my relationship where my partner was not very compassionate to it. He was the kind of person that was like, you know, didn't look at it as a disease, but looked at it as a problem of personal willpower. And was abusive in the sense of being like, you're just a fucking mess, like get your shit together. You know what I mean? Which only kind of pushed me deeper into like, I am a fucking mess. I suck. I'm the worst. Let me just like medicate that feeling, or let me starve that feeling. Long story short, was there an aha moment? Yes. There was a moment of violence that occurred in front of his daughter when she was 9 years old. And it was an awakening for me. And the awakening was, I'm teaching her that this is what love looks like. And I'm going to cry as I say that, because I just I have so much compassion for myself, who I was at that point, and so much compassion really for both of them, for my ex-partner and for his daughter. A lot for her, you know, because I think a lot of why I stayed was believing that she didn't have, you know, that I wanted her to have consistency in her life. And I didn't want her, she'd already experienced the separation of her biological parents. I didn't want her to have an additional trauma of me leaving, even though I really wasn't the greatest like stepmom figure. I was so immature. I was only 11 years older than her. I got pissed off at her all the time. If you're listening, you know who you are. I love you and I'm sorry. And so that aha moment was, I was very deep in my own addictions and in my own disordered eating. But I also just realized like, I can't stay. And so I was also afraid for my safety in terms of letting him know that I was leaving. So, I created a plan where on his 28th birthday, there was a big party that we were throwing, and, I set everything up for the party, and then he was golfing and he was going to meet me at the party. And I was like, I'm going to go home and change. And I went home and I had folded everything nicely in my drawers and in my closet. Everything was ready. And I threw it all into my suitcases. I took about 3 hours and packed everything in, and I knew he was drunk. He'd been drinking all day on the golf course, packed everything, packed my dog, and left my home. And I went to stay with a friend in San Diego, one of my best friends. And then she was imploring me, please stay, please don't leave, please don't go. And I left her too. And I drove cross country by myself without a destination or a plan. I was just escaping. I basically escaped. And so yeah, there was an aha moment.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And I think too, what's interesting is when you felt that was such a time that you weren't self-aware as you would consider yourself today, but still had a wherewithal of like, I'm out, and to be able to put that together to make that change, and, never underestimating the power of a decision. Your whole life is different.
Yeah. And I think, I'm a firm believer in perfect divine timing. So I do believe that relationship needed to run the course that it did. Though I will say my intuition, I certainly knew by year 2 that this was not the person for me. And I think that's I'm not sure about that, whether there is one person for everyone or not. I believe in it a lot more now because of my husband, who's just amazing. But at the time, I think that's where the youthful insecurity and unsurety really reveals itself, is, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And so even though you might have this intuition that I don't think this is right for me, or maybe this isn't it, it's easy to rationalize yourself out of that and say, well, but this is the best I've ever had. Yeah. If the best you've ever had is a 3, you think the 3 is a 10 because it's the best you've ever had. Right. You've never had a 4. You know what I mean?
And how, if you're viewing yourself at that time as a 3 also, when you're really a 10, right? And so the whole skew is off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, so it was, I'm so grateful now for that experience, because one thing that I have learned is, some people hear my story and they go, oh my gosh, drugs and sex and violence and, just all of these periods of drama in your life. Yes. And every single one taught me non-judgment, taught me compassion, and it taught me that we all have a story, and we all have a personal narrative that is as complex and deep and dark at times as everybody else, right? There's a word sonder, and it's S-O-N-D-E-R, and it means that everybody's internal experience is as rich and complex as your own. And I think that every single challenge that I've gone through, though they sound dramatic and, they make great stories, I needed every single one to become someone who could empower and educate and encourage people through what life brings to us, which is grief and addiction and pain and suffering. And of course, all the joy and everything beautiful on the other end of the spectrum.
It's like the darkness allows you to see the light. And I think contrast being such a beautiful gift of an experience. Absolutely.
And I think that's where, you asked if I had an aha moment. A lot of times I get asked the question of whether I ever had a rock bottom. Like, if was that the rock bottom? And I love that question because, and I wrote this down one time, like, I don't think of rock bottom as a singular place. I think of rock bottom as a subterranean cavern in which there's always there's always a deeper hole, right? There's always a deeper hole until you get to the magma at the center of the earth, which will burn you alive. And for us, I think, the physical manifestation of that is usually death, right? You can keep going deeper and deeper into a rock bottom until it kills you. I thankfully, obviously didn't do that, though I did have a few overdose experiences and human encounter experiences, which were quite scary and close to death. But yeah, I would love to be like, yeah, I left him and then everything got better. And that's not true. I left him and then everything got worse, or everything got different.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued in a pattern of pretty self-destructive behavior until I was 23, almost 24. So 2009 was when I would say I had like the biggest shift in terms of a life surrender, where I made an internal commitment to myself and to God to become the woman that I was created to be. And that's when things really started to change. But I mean, in between there, when I left with a truck full of, my clothes and a bunch of drugs and my dog and no plan, and a bunch of credit cards with really high limits, because I was making a lot of money at that time in the mortgage industry, right? Like I said, before it exploded. I mean, like right before, like 6 months before everything fell apart. I was set up for, disaster. Like, what could be worse than a woman with nothing to lose, a whole bunch of drugs, $100,000 in open credit on plastic, and nowhere to go? Like, that's a recipe for disaster, right? But it was the recipe that would end up resulting in my faith. And it was the recipe that would result in me recognizing my power. And it was the beginning of me appreciating and understanding the divine feminine, though I wouldn't have called it that at the time.
You can see it clearly now.
Yeah. I mean, I basically, when I left that relationship and drove across country, a woman who doesn't have a lot of resources will often fall back on one resource that she does have, which is herself, right? And I don't mean pulling myself up by my bootstraps. I mean pulling myself up by my boobies. That's a thing.
It is now.
It's a thing now, yeah. But I also, having been in that long-term relationship 6 years, the dynamic there was not really balanced in terms of provision. I was the breadwinner in that relationship. And so I always worked 2 jobs, and I made good money, and I was really sick of it. I was really pissed off at being controlled and stepped on and providing for. And so I made a conscious decision when I left him that I would no longer date for love, and that emotional attachment would not play a role in my strategic partnerships. And so I still wanted sex because I am a very sexual being. So it seemed only logical to me to look at the sugar baby relationship. And that is, if you're not familiar, dating older, wealthy men who are looking for a more like no strings attached kind of relationship, where there's some sort of arrangement of you provide for these financial needs for me, I'll provide for your needs of company and entertainment. And when it comes to, it being a relationship, we'll set the parameters of whatever that looks like, whether it's open or closed or monogamous or not. And so is that prostitution? I mean, that's a question where I think the label isn't really very helpful. I know that there's a lot of women who would admit that they've stayed in a relationship longer than maybe they wanted to for financial security. I mean, there's lifelong marriages where the reality, especially, in generations maybe 1 or 2 older than us, that weren't brought up with as much emphasis on female independence, where women will stay in a lifelong marriage with someone who they really don't want to be with because they don't feel like they have other options.
Right. They'll get taken to the bank and be left and have nothing. And
yeah, or they feel like they don't know how to work, they don't have marketable skills, whatever it is. And People say prostitution is the oldest profession. And when I think of prostitution, the way our media portrays it, especially because in the United States, sex work is illegal. We think of women out on street corners, hooking, and like, it's very sordid and seedy and all of that. That wasn't the experience that I had. I mean, I was dating mostly men who were actually quite wealthy, like private plane level wealthy, multiple homes across the globe wealthy, very smart men, a lot of really interesting conversations, a lot of great experience opportunities, travel. I was able to indulge my designer clothes and shoes habit and all of that. There was a lot of great things about it. And in fact, I have fondness for, some of the men that I dated during that time. But there were also a couple really dark experiences, some criminals and then again, criminal is another label, but I mean, one situation that ended up in extortion, and that there's no resolution for that, where my family was basically taken for over $200,000 by someone who was supposed to be this wealthy guy. My mom got my mom into some really bad legal stuff there, and I carry that with me forever. And then one of the gentlemen that I dated for a long time, who was actually one of my most serious relationships, ended up going to prison for securities fraud, which was something that he was apparently involved in while we were dating. But it was a lot of like smoke and mirrors, you know what I mean? With both parties. It was like, you never really knew what his financial situation really was. I would say only one of the men that I dated was actually really on like the up and up, and like, he was actually a great guy who now is happily married to someone, just as I'm happily married to someone. And congratulations to you if you're listening. But it was a lot. I think it's so interesting, because I think that the sugar baby, sugar daddy relationship, it really plays on our kind of deep, like, whether they're biological or social, but desires, where women want to be loved and adored and taken care of, and men want to be respected. And that's some people are going to get pissed hearing that, and you're like, that's so sexist. Women want respect and men need love too. Yes, everybody needs all of these things. But I mean, there's a book that I read a few years ago, which I thought was really fascinating. And it was like a pretty good sample size. 100,000 men and 100,000 women were polled, or 100,000 total, and asked the questions of, if you had to be loved but not respected, or respected but not loved, which would you choose? And it was like 85% of men chose to be respected but unloved, so respected but alone. And 85% of women chose to be loved and not respected.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so maybe this is something that we learn. Maybe it is, I think you and I talked about female competition and natural selection, not on the show, but just as a sidebar recently. So maybe there is part of that that's true, that, women are willing to be less respected, or, if it means that we're receiving what we perceive as love, which is financial provision, shelter, food, and like physical affection, so it was really, really interesting. I will say that period of my life was so fun in many ways, but it was a very dark kind of fun. I was still doing a lot of cocaine and like partying in clubs in Vegas and private planes in Miami. And it was just like the scene, Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful that I did all of that, because in terms of like, people wondering like if they get enough wildness in their lives, like I'm good. Like I'm good. I've had enough sordid and wild and depraved and crazy stories that I am so happy and comfortable just with my like sweet life now, which actually is very exciting in different ways. It's exciting in healthy ways, like surfing and travel and adventure and parenthood and entrepreneurship, which are all risky and exciting in their own way.
When you were in it, did you feel like, well, this is what my life will be like forever? Or did you think that there would be a different chapter for you?
Such a good question. Part of me thought that it would be like that forever. And I call him my New York Jew. I was willing and wanted to marry him on some level. I did and I didn't. I was like, I could do this and this would be a good idea and I would be taken care of and I really like him, you know, but I was a jerk to him, you know, like he dumped me by email. Good job, friend. It was a smart decision on his part. But I did think like that I could do that for life. But I think I was just lying to myself, obviously, because I'm still me. I was still me. I was still this like sensitive, heart-centered, you know, really deeply loving person who was trying really hard to cover all of that up with a bitchy attitude and expensive clothes and makeup. But it all was rooted in just wanting to be like loved and not left. You know, I had daddy issues. I mean, come on, you know, it's pretty obvious, like right. That I was working through those daddy issues. So yeah, I think my first or my inclination that maybe life needed to look different or be different was, like I said, my dad was really sick, and during spring of 2009, it was like they gave him a prognosis and they said, okay, you've got 3 months to live or something like that. And though they had said, I think they said 6 months, and they had said that many times in life before, but my dad told me like, this time they're right. Like, I know, you know, I know I'm not going to make it. And when that happened, something in me shifted and I was like, I want to go home. You know, I'd been living on the East Coast. I'd been splitting my time. I worked as a flight attendant while I was doing the sugar baby thing. So I did have a job, but I chose voluntary furlough a lot because I just wanted to travel and have fun and get, and, you know, do my thing. And so when I found out my dad wasn't going to live, I just kind of, I put all that on the back burner. I tried to get family leave from my job. I couldn't. So I just quit my job and I was like, I'm moving back to California. Like, I'm going to be with my dad for this last 6 months. I don't know what happens after that. And something about my dad, like was going to die. I think that somehow shifted like the daddy issues or the sugar. It just, I don't know. It was a different way all of a sudden where I was just like, what really matters? You know what I mean? What really matters? And like all this, you know, I spent almost 3 years doing the money and drugs and partying and all of that. And I was like, still just as empty as when I started. And it was like, I was in that rock bottom of subterranean caverns, like crawling from one to the next, like which way is up? How the hell do I get out of this cavern? You know what I mean? And so basically that decision to come back to California severed all of those relationships. And when I got back to California, my dad actually refused to let me come and live with him. So I was like, I'm coming back to California. I'm going to move in with you. I'm going to take care of you. And he was like, no, you're not. He lived down in Palm Springs and I was up in or Sacramento near where my mom was. And he said, listen, like, I'm not going to live. Like, I don't want you to uproot your whole life and come down here to try to take care of me. You need to go back to school. You need to figure out what you're doing, you know? And that was really hard because I had already quit my job and like started the process of like getting rid of my lease in North Carolina. And I ended my lease in Ohio. I had 2 different apartments. And I didn't know, then I was like, well, what the hell am I going to do? You know what I mean? I quit my flight attendant job. I guess I can go back to school. I don't have a plan. I don't know what I want. And so that summer of 2009 was when this was all kind of going down. And I still had a lot of relational drama with these relationships that were like being let go of. One, I got dumped by email. The other one, because these were occurring simultaneously. I was dating these people simultaneously. The other one, there was a lot of drama. Stole the title of my car, stole my diamond earrings, did a bunch of stuff. This is the one that ended up having some trouble with the law. Big surprise there. And so I found myself on the beach, right? Of course, back on the beach. The beach has always been my place. It's the place that gives me like a mirror. So every time I come back to the beach, I feel like I have the opportunity to see how I've grown or how I've changed since my last visit. My family has a beach house on the central coast of California where you have been. Yeah. So I was there with my sister on vacation and we were both in a period of massive transition. She just ended a long-term relationship in a pretty not nice way. It was a shit show, really. And so had I. And so I had a spiritual awakening, where I was sitting on the beach and I was meditating, and I was just like, I just give up, and I give in, and I give it over again, God. And I already had a relationship with God. I got saved when I was 22, which for me means, I came into a relationship with Jesus, and it was incredibly powerful and experiential and not doctrine driven. It was just like, we'll talk about that on another show when we talk about spirituality. But so I already had a relationship with God, but in summer of 2009, I gave my life in a new way. Like, I was like, I want to be the woman that I was created to be, and I don't know what that means. So change me. Like, and I consciously said, I'm not dating for the next 5 years. Like, I want to give up on men. Not that I wanted to be a lesbian, but like, I just wanted to not pursue relationships, and I wanted to surf and write and do yoga and make art and like just develop these other aspects of myself that I knew were in there that I had always kind of suppressed for the sake of trying to get that money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was like a shift. And interestingly, in that meditation and in that prayer, I basically swore off men and said, whatever you want for my life, God. And then 3 days later, on 9/9/09 at 9 p.m.
Oh my gosh.
I met my husband in a bar, an old Western saloon in Cayucas, California, that's been in business since the late 1800s and has 30-foot tall paintings of women on topless cowgirls on the walls. I met my husband there, and the night that I met him, it was like supposed to be a hookup. It was supposed to be like, it wasn't Tinder, but it was OkCupid, and it was like, I'm on vacation, you're really hot, you want to have a beer? He's like, sure. Turns out he'd never met anyone from online dating. I was obviously coming out of I was just a hot mess express. And the night that I met him, we sat at the bar talking and having a couple beers, not even getting like drunk. We had 3 beers between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. And I heard a voice. And this is the only time in my life that this has happened to me. So if you're listening and this gives you any sense of like spiritual inadequacy or inferiority, or you think I'm a psycho, that's totally fine. But I heard a voice, and all it said was, this is the man you're going to marry. And it was audible. It was an out loud voice that was outside myself, and it sounded just like my voice, but definitive. And so it was like the voice of my highest self. And it was so loud and so outside me that I actually interrupted him. I was like, I'm sorry. Like, did you hear that? And he was like, hear what? And I was like, okay. Nothing, I don't know. And so it was very strange because unlike any other relationship that I'd had before, I didn't believe in that stuff. First of all, I didn't believe in a notebook kind of love. I didn't believe in love at first sight. Didn't believe in, really, from, you guys can probably tell from my story, it wasn't really in a space of really believing in romantic love at all. And so to have that experience was very interesting, because not only did I think he was the most attractive man I'd ever seen, and I just was so turned on by him being a surfer and being, military, and he was just so cool. He was so cool. He was so funny and so nice.
So cool.
He is so cool. But I was just like blown away by like, okay, this voice is telling me that this is the person. And so, it's a story for another day, but what ended up happening is like, I showed up in that relationship in a different way than I ever had before. And I let myself be seen. In fact, my immediate response when I heard that voice was, I said, you want to play a game? And he goes, I don't know, maybe. And I'm like, okay, here's the game. I'm going to tell you everything bad about myself, all the worst stuff about myself. And if you're still sitting here at the end of it, then we can keep hanging out. And he was like, okay. Like, probably thinking like, that doesn't really sound like that fun of a game, but sure. What? He's like, this girl's crazy. Let's go. And so everything that I just told you guys, I just unloaded on him, but it was
like the shame dump.
Totally. But it was all, now I'm talking about it. It's 10 years old. The worst of these wounds are 10 years old, if not older. And at the time it was like, no, I was in it. Like I was in it. I was still being stalked by this, one of these past relationships. I was still, I was still using a lot of the drugs. I was still in it, and so I dumped it all. I told him all this stuff, and I just kept going and going and going. And, I've been arrested for shoplifting. I didn't even share that story, told all these stories. And when I got to the end of everything that I could think to say, it probably took me like 12 to 15 minutes. He was smiling, like a funny little like smirk. And I was like, okay. And he goes, is that all? And I was like, well, that's all I can think of right now.
Just wait.
I'm sure there's more. And he's like, all right. He goes, you want to go shoot some pool? I was like, okay. So we went and shot pool, and the rest is history.
Amazing. So when you think about, the stories that you told us and your life now, and you would say like, what are your life pillars or life words? What are they?
Well, I think now my life pillars are like feeling, like feel it, feel all of it, feel the good, feel the bad, feel your light, feel your dark, like feel your body, feel your mind, like just do it. Don't numb out from it. Feel. Beauty. Like I'm still very much, one of my favorite quotes is, I will make everything around me beautiful, and this will be my life. And I do feel like life is art, like we have this beautiful canvas and we have the ability to make it anything we want. And with art, there really are no rules, just that you need to create, So I would say create is definitely one of my words. I'm a creatrix by nature. I love to be in the creative process. And I believe that we are created in the image of the creator of the universe, men, women, all of us. And I believe that when we are in the creative process, that is the creation and love are the two ways that we come closest to divinity. And so love is another one of my words. My ultimate life mission is just to love people the way God loves them, which is full and unconditional and just full of grace. So that's probably my last one, is grace. But I really believe, and if you don't know what grace is getting what you don't deserve. And so we all feel a lot of times like we don't necessarily deserve all of the good or all of the beauty or all of the joy. And grace says, yeah, maybe not, but you can have it anyway. And so I feel like I live my whole life by grace. Everything I have is because of grace. And it's my hope to give love and give grace to every person that I touch.
I love you.
I love you too.
All right. So I want to know a few other things.
All right. I have answers for you. Hopefully.
I made up my rendition of Kill F Mary, which we got to play last week.
Oh man, I'm in for it. Okay. Hopefully I know who they are.
I think you do. All right. Brett Kavanaugh.
Oh, gross. Okay.
Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock.
Okay.
And George Clooney.
Oh man. Okay. Wow,
I don't know if I made it too easy or too.
Well, okay. I mean, I'd kill Brett Kavanaugh. Sorry, like whether you did it or didn't do it, I find you annoying, and the fact that you couldn't acknowledge that you've ever been blackout drunk, just like you gotta go, man. Your time here is done. So he's out. Man. I love George Clooney's commitment to social justice and philanthropy. So I'm going to go ahead and marry him.
Nice one.
And that means that I'm boning The Rock. And the funny thing about this is that I'm pretty sure that early on in my relationship with my husband, we played the like, who would your celebrity like sex be? And I got confused I confused somebody with somebody else. And I think I actually said like The Rock, but I meant like Jesse Cena or somebody. It was somebody else who like also was equally like just a big ball of meat, and like it was like, and I like forever have regretted like sharing that with my husband. He will never let me live it down. Like he's always like, his was like Angelina Jolie or something like so cookie cutter. But I think because like he's so not a meathead, and the fact that like whatever I chose was like a total meat choice, that he was just like so grossed out by it. Like he was like, that is like so embarrassing. So this is incredibly embarrassing, and hopefully he doesn't listen to this episode.
Back again.
Yeah. So that's my kill off Mary.
All right. I want to know your favorite top 3, 2, or 1 throwback songs.
Okay, so so my number 1 favorite throwback song is Hold On by Wilson Phillips.
Can you sing a line?
There's change. Hold on for one more day and break free from the chains. That's one of my favorites. I love it. It's like ultimate girl anthem. Like you just hear it and you just, I don't know. It's just like, please, one more day. Yeah, please go listen to it right now. It'll make your day. And then I would also say the entire album of East 1999 Eternal by Bone Thugs. There's a song in there, Weed Song. Weed Song is definitely one of my fave throwback jams ever. Every time I need to free my mind, I can find satisfaction in a bag of weed. Everything I need, leave it to the trees. They can make me feel better. And every day I wake, rolling up blunts and more blunts and more blunts. And I keep a case of future sweets in the trunk. So when I'm rolling, okay, I'll stop. I could keep going, but I'll stop.
Yeah, that'll be an extra.
Yeah, and then my third, it's not necessarily one of my favorites, but there was an entire year around age 14 where I listened to Blue Dabba Dee Dabba Die.
Oh my God.
Like repeat on my CD player, not exaggerating, for like a year. And so when you asked me this list, I was like, I feel like I have to put Blue Dabba Dee Dabba Die because it's not one of my favorites. I don't want to hear it now, but like it was Daft Punk, right? It was like Daft Punk's first
early day.
Yeah. And so that was definitely like the anthem for like a year of my life.
Nice.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm gonna be having that in my head now. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think you touched on your 3 life lessons. I mean, Sandra, that was so powerful, and I really like that resonated. If there was anything that you didn't feel like you could share, do you want to add?
Well, I would re-emphasize those and just say that everyone has a story. A lot of stories, but you know, sometimes I meet people or I'll coach women or talk to people and they almost have insecurity around the flip side of this. Like they feel like their life has been too pure or it's boring, or they don't have any conflict or drama or whatever. And if that's you, like, no, dig deeper, because you do. We all have stuff. We all have
and it can look a lot different, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's not all going to be sex and drugs and rock and roll, but everyone has a story. And like the intersection of where those stories meet is what weaves the fabric of like humanity, right? We're all weaving a big tapestry, and we're all writing like a big never ending story together.
And the fact that thread, like we've all had suffering.
Exactly. Yeah. And pain, and there is no greater pain. I think that's one lesson that I would say is really important, because we tend to compare our pain and our suffering just like we compare, you know, our pleasure and our productivity or success. But there is no greater pain. So whether you're dealing with the grief of losing a pet, or, you know, catastrophic life collapse and your house burned down and you lost everything, or you're like Job in the Bible and like you lost your whole family and all of your riches and your health and everything, like, you know, pain is pain and suffering is suffering. And so doesn't matter what your external circumstances look like, the internal experience of suffering is just the same from person to person. So the compassion is the lesson that comes out of that. And then my second, I think, big life lesson is that your mess is your message. So when you grow through pain and you're able to mine it for the gold, share it with people. Like, don't allow shame and guilt to keep your message confined, because truly, you know, it can be scary to open up and to be honest with people. But I can assure you that pretty much every single time you do it, somebody's going to hear your story and say, wow, me too. And they're going to feel a little bit more okay about themselves and their lives. So to the extent that you are able to, you know, be vulnerable and be honest, I believe that telling the truth is like the cure for almost everything. Not everything, but almost everything. And there are times that it like, yeah, okay, white lies, sure. But in general, I think that truth results in freedom. And so I think, you know, you can figure out that from which life lessons these or from which pain points these life lessons grew out of. But basically, like, yeah, your mess is your message. Everyone has a story, and then the truth will set you free. And I experience that more and more every day as I continue to do things like this and open up around stories that I felt like I needed to hide them, you know, and I felt like I needed to just keep them to myself. And the past 5 years of working with women and with sharing these stories one-on-one and one-on-one and one-on-one, and then maybe a small group, like it's just opened up worlds of freedom. And it's like getting air and light on a wound. You know what I mean? It's like, that's how you heal it. And that's when you really can start to find the blessings and the lessons that hopefully other people can learn from.
And the healing that happens in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Retelling is one of the most powerful therapeutic tools. You know, we talk a lot about external processing and how important that is for humans to be seen and heard and acknowledged, even if not loved, but just acknowledged. Like, I see you, I see your story, I see your pain, and it's valid, you know? So, yeah.
Cool, girl. You know what time it is right now, don't ya?
I know what time it is.
It's time for the book club.
All right. So
I want to know what the books are. You can have up to 5. And I want to know, like, if you could summarize 1 to 2 sentences of what it did for you.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely do that. So, so number 1 is Carry On Warrior by Glennon Doyle, now Glennon Doyle Melton Wambach, who's one of my heroines. She is, I just absolutely admire her and love her so much because I believe she's a fierce and fearless truth teller. And reading that book, she was one of the first books that I read, and to be followed by work by Cheryl Strayed, where she was just honest. She just talked about her dependency on alcohol and drugs and the dark night of the soul that led to. And then in a very funny way and a very real way brought us, you know, through that, and continually does that in her writing. She just shares really relatable human experiences and experiences of challenge and suffering, and uses just telling the truth and doing the next right thing to navigate through those challenges. So if you haven't read Carry On Warrior, it's applicable to all humans. It's hilarious. Please go buy it because it's a great book. Okay, 2. Okay, just keep going. Okay, 2. Feminine Genius by Liana Silver is my number 2. This book is like my divine feminine handbook.
You've been telling me about this for 2
Oh my God, I
for
love
me
this
not
book.
to have read.
Yeah, Feminine Genius, the provocative path to waking up and turning on the wisdom of being a woman. So this, for me, you know, having an alliance with Jesus and our cultural understanding of Jesus, not as necessarily like a radical, liberal, revolutionary, non-dualistic free thinker, which is how I perceive him. There's a lot of patriarchy involved in that. And so one of the things that I came to was like this deep need of feeling like I needed to balance that polarity with an understanding of the shadow and an understanding of the divine feminine and an understanding of the moon and all of these aspects of myself that I just don't always see reflected in that kind of aspect of my spirituality. And this book is like, I mean, everything from goddess archetypes to practical meditations and breath work for getting into your feminine power, emotional integration and emotional awareness, and embodiment. This is like chock full of embodiment practices. So everything that I basically told you that I, you know, struggled through, this book is just so, it's just gold. Like I read it and reread it. You can tell Linda's looking at it. It's marked up, it's dog-eared, it's written all over. I've got Post-it notes in it. Can't recommend it enough, ladies. Please go buy it. We'll put some Amazon drop downs in the description. I got to do that for your episode too. All right, side note. 3rd is The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. Huge C.S. Lewis fan over here. If you're not familiar with C.S. Lewis's work, he was an intellectual and non-believer who, in an attempt to intellectually disprove Christianity, became a believer in Christ. But all of his writings are very intellectual and very I would say, broad-minded in terms of the way that he understands his spiritual relationship and spiritual agency. And so The Great Divorce is about that. It's about spiritual agency. It's about the concepts of heaven and hell and whether they are totally separate and distinct, or whether they're perhaps two ends of a continuum in which we can always flow towards grace. So basically, it follows a field trip from people who are in purgatory or maybe in hell, and that's up to the reader to figure out, who are given permission to go and visit heaven. And then, of course, not just permission, but encouragement to stay, an invitation to stay, the extension of grace even beyond death, I believe exists. So, again, side note for our spiritual conversation, but I believe Jesus went into hell and preached the gospel to the captives there. And whatever your whether the word Jesus turns you on or off, or God turns you on or off, grace is always available. And I don't even think that death can stop that. So that's my 2 cents on that. And then last, 2 books by Michael Singer.
Love Mickey Singer.
Oh my gosh, he's so amazing. Who is an entrepreneur and a corporate CEO who basically committed to meditation as a life practice and had just crazy experiences and results. And so I couldn't decide between 2 of his books. One, an earlier book is called The Untethered Soul. And this is basically his explanations of yogic philosophy and meditation and his experiences. It's a very relatable, I think, book in terms of meditation for like the Western world. So I would say definitely give that a read. And then a further book that he wrote, The Surrender Experiment, which follows his commitment to live in a state of surrender to whatever life brought him, and not just surrender in like, oh, I give up kind of way, but his commitment was to greet every encounter, interaction, set of circumstances as though he chose it. And then how did that transform his life? So I'm trying to immediately approach the circumstances though, this is what I chose and I'm meeting it with joy. And carrying that through basically the destruction and falling apart of his corporate enterprises and his life finances and everything in his life, kind of like Job's situation where everything was falling to shambles around him. And how could he choose to remain in that space of surrender? So those are my fave books. There's a whole lot more, but I had to pick 5. So those are the 5 that I feel like have been most transformative in my life.
Those last 2, especially the Temple of the Universe, that could be a side field trip someday.
Yeah, I would love that. It's in Florida, right?
Yeah,
I haven't been.
It's a pretty easy drive. So.
For listeners, the Temple of the Universe is the ashram or spiritual gathering place that Michael Singer founded. And it was a commune or an area for people to live and do spiritual exploration. So if you want to go on a Rise to Thrive field trip, we'll get that scheduled.
All right, so let's close today. I want to hear and you to share your words to live by.
Okay, so my words to live by, stay in it, whatever it is. Stay in it, feel the feelings. I think that's a radical practice, and it sounds so very, very simple, but it is not. So stay in it and feel the feelings is 1. And then 2, just remember that you are the center of your universe. And when I was a teenager, one of the things I would tell myself is I am the princess of the universe. And as I grew into my faith, that became I am the daughter of the Most High King. And that's true for me. And it's also true for every other person on this planet. All 7 billion of us are the center of our universe, and we are children of royalty. We are children of God. We are, and that being not a subservient role, but being a role of power and authority, and opportunity, right? So just remember that you are the center of the universe. And so is everybody else. So when you're engaging and interacting with people, just remember that. And you can be rooted and grounded in the fact that you are the center of the universe. And you can also honor and respect that so are they, right? And so that I think gives us the ability to have a little bit of more perspective and more compassion for other humans.
Awesome. Any other nuggets? I think that's the mic drop.
I just want to say that I love you guys, and I'm so thankful that you guys are here listening. It it's just a beautiful, beautiful opportunity to connect. And I hope that the connection flows outward. And I hope that this episode inspires you to be a little bit more bold in sharing your story, and in just loving on yourself and other people. So I just freaking love you guys. And I'm just super grateful for you. And Linda, man, I love you.
I love you too. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, listeners. And we are alchemizing some more greatness in the coming months and year, and can't wait to share. So thank you all for tuning in, and your nuggets to tune in weekly to thrive daily.
Yee-hoo!
Yeehaw!
All right, guys. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for being here. Keep thriving.
You.